had been a baby in San Antonio. My parents lived here as a young couple, Robert Bruce Banks and Velma Tompkins Banks. And I love the fact that I, was a child here, but sadly my father died when I was just 1.5. My mother was a very young widow, and so she did what most young widows would do. She moved back with her family, had a very wonderful childhood, but then we ended up back in San Antonio. My husband and I had met out in Colorado when I was between my junior and senior years in college, and I had a very memorable summer because that summer I met the man that would be my husband. Then eventually I had an opportunity to become more and more involved in the community. I had always been interested in government just as sort of a hobby, and in high school and in college I had been on the debate team where I debated issues that were in the public arena, and so just enjoyed the opportunity to know more about government. I joined an organization that was called the League of Women Voters and became quite active, and then got elected to the presidency, and then I served 2 terms as president of the San Antonio League of Women Voters. And one day I had a call from then Mayor Walter W. McAllister, said that he would like to bring some gentlemen over to call on me. Well, naturally I was a little intrigued by what that might be, but at any rate I said, well, that would be fine. And at that time we were living in a home on Mary Louise Drive, and so that on the appointed day, I looked out the front door and 2 cars drove up to my front porch, or right on the street there rather, and 5 men got out of each car. And I thought, oh, that looked kind of formidable. So anyway, they came up to the door, and they were an official committee from something that was then called the Good Government League. And the Good Government League was a local civic organization that had been organized on more or less a nonpartisan basis to try to select and invite candidates to run for city council. So I was the first woman to be approached to be on the Good Government League ticket. I was not the first woman to serve on the council, but I was the first woman to serve with the Good Government League in their team approach. To run for an office, a political office at that time for a woman was very challenging, and you were a little hesitant to put yourself forward as a candidate, and you would have to try to raise funds to pay for a political campaign, and it opened the door for a lot of very exciting adventures for me, because in the first place, when you're a candidate, you get invited to speak, in a lot of pre-election events, and so because I was the first woman on their ticket, there were a number of women's organizations that had not had the opportunity to espouse a woman candidate, and so I began to get noticed and began to get elected. And then in 1975 was the time when the Good Government League decided it was now time to have a woman candidate for mayor. And that was a new adventure. In the past, we had thought San Antonio was a great city. This was our city. We just loved it, had an interesting history. But nationally, it was never accorded a lot of real respect. It was sort of as that sleepy little southern city, down there somewhere in Texas. And I would choose to go to national meetings with the National League of Cities and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And sometime in the past, more of the mayors who had served San Antonio had just preferred to stay home and be mayor, But I saw this as an opportunity to thrust San Antonio into a more of a national leadership role and an international role. There were all kinds of struggles. I guess I think of what I called the utility wars. First of all, we had to be thinking about our long-term energy needs for a city. And early on, I became concerned about the contracts we had for the natural gas supplies for the city. We had a contract with the Lavaca Gathering Company, which was a subsidiary of Coastal States. I became concerned as to their deliverability because we had a contract to get natural gas for San Antonio through City Public Service. And they began to try to shortchange us on how much gas we were going to get. Well, I said, we have a contract with them. We shouldn't put up with this. We've got to sue. Well, that seemed to be a different idea to some of the leadership at the time. And I said, this is business. We have a contract. And so I said, sue. And so finally, the suit was filed. And as a result of that suit, which we won, we had a major settlement, not only in cash, but then when it came down to the final negotiations, I remember I was then mayor, and they brought me what was the final plan to settle the suit, and it was very lucrative for San Antonio. But then I said just one more thing. What I want in addition is I want the headquarters of the new company that is going to be formed to replace the Lavaca Gathering Company. I want the new company not in Corpus, where Lavaca was. I want it in San Antonio. And so initially they said, no, we can't do that. And so I just looked at them and I said, I'll see you in court. Well, in about 2 or 3 weeks, they came back and they said, okay, we're gonna come to San Antonio. And so that, of course, meant a lot to San Antonio. We needed new industry. And so that turned into Valero. I didn't mind making ripples. I didn't mind when Oscar Wyatt had a few ugly things to say about that woman in San Antonio that got back to me. Yeah. But anyway, because I was fighting for what I thought were the rights that we had in San Antonio to protect our citizens, and so I was going to put up the fight. I spotted Henry as a really bright young leader, and he came on as a councilman, and the one thing that I did, not just for Henry, but I think that was so good for the city, I brought Henry together with General Robert F. McDermott. He headed USAA. He was one of the top 2 or 3 business leaders in the city. And so he was always coming to my office when I was mayor, saying, this is what I think you ought to do, Mayor. Well, he was a very forceful kind of a fellow, and I would always listen to him, and then I would decide if I thought it was a good idea. And if I did, I accepted it. But if I didn't, I had to explain to McD that, no, I'm not going to do that, McD. And this is why. I always explained my reasons if I didn't agree with him. And then, very reluctantly, he would finally accept the fact that I wasn't going to do what he wanted. and so he understood that he could propose, but that I didn't have to do what he wanted. Yeah. We sort of worked out a tri-party leadership plan for the city. But I can't spend all my time just with this, putting the new organization together. And I said, I've got a young man on my council, Henry Cisneros, who is up and coming. He is very, very bright, and he has the time to give. And so I introduced McD and Henry, and it was terrific. It clicked, and McD recognized how smart Henry was, as I had done. And then we also had a community leader. And at that time, the one we picked was Raul Jimenez. And so those three were a trio, the community, the government, and the business sector, who put together plans moving forward for the city. I remember waking up one morning, happy as a lark, a Sunday morning. My husband and I were having breakfast, and the telephone rang. And it was a UPI reporter, Universal International reporter. And he said, Mayor Cockrell, I want to get your comments. Now, how do you feel about the fact that the Shah of Iran is in your city? I nearly dropped the phone. I said, well, first of all, you're telling me something of which I am not aware. And I said, give me the facts.
We interrupt this program for a live special report on the scene from Channel 12 Newswatch.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gene Tuck. The Iranian crisis has come to San Antonio. Keeping you abreast of the fast-paced developments today, the deposed Shah of Iran was flown to our city shortly after 8 o'clock this morning. The Shah left a New York City hospital before dawn today on direct orders from President Carter. The Shah had been undergoing cancer treatments in New York. Now, at this moment, the Shah is at the Wilford Hall Medical Center at Lackland Air Force Base, where he's scheduled to continue his medical treatments. We will continue to keep our news staff at the ready, and we will break in as conditions warrant and as this story develops.
This has been a special live report on the scene from Channel 12 Newswatch. We return you now to regular programming.
I knew in my heart it was big trouble. But when I hung up, I knew we were in for something. So the next day the phone rang, and it was the commanding general of Brooks Air Force Base. And he said, I guess you have heard that we have the Shah of Iran on our premises. And I said, well, we will certainly be ready as a city government to extend any courtesies that would be appropriate to the Shah. And so if you will just let me know what you feel you might need by way of supportive help from the city government, I'll be happy to try to arrange it. 2 days later, I get a call again, and the commanding officer of Brooks would like for you and your husband to come out and join for a small dinner party honoring the Shah. And there would just be 4 couples there. And the general and his wife, the Shah and the Empress. The very next day, his nephew was assassinated in Paris. And then that created a further atmosphere of worry and concern, because he was a very internationally controversial figure. And meanwhile, there were some Iranian students in San Antonio who were anti-Shah. And so they came into the city to get a parade permit. And they were going to have a big anti-Shaw parade. Well, the chief of police came to me, and he said, you know, we've got a situation here. If there is a pro-Shaw parade, and we've got all these anti-Shaw young activist students in town, and there were some at Lackland with the military. We had, he was very worried about possible serious incidents. And so we had a time there, we had to tread very, very carefully. And so we really, it was sort of a time when we had to balance civil rights of these students who wanted to have a big parade with the overall concerns of the safety in the community. And so we went through the procedures. They applied for a parade permit. And in the first round, the committee who gave those permits within the city turned them down. And then it got bounced up to the council. And I decided that although I knew that it would be challenged constitutionally, that the council needed to turn it down. We just couldn't run the risk of having a big riot in the city. And then I think it was better not to have any discussion. I think there just should be a motion to decline the permit and pass that motion. And as soon as the motion is passed, I will adjourn the meeting, and we will get up and leave the chamber, and that will be it. Well, the chamber got packed, and fortunately the council all worked together on this. So we did it just like that. I called the meeting, we heard the petition by the students, and then there was a motion to deny the permit. And it passed. And we got up and left. We knew that in the long term, probably there were constitutional issues, but it would be several years before it had to move through the legal steps. And it did. And that action was declared unconstitutional. But I think it saved our city from having some kind of a riot. And so it was the only time I did anything that I thought was questionable under the law.
San Antonio crackdown.
Well, you know, we just all have to work together because this is a problem that infests every single neighborhood. It's attacking our children, our youth, who are the future of our city. It's just into every strata of society. It's something that this city has to come together and say, no more.
There was a time that came when people wanted more voice, and particularly on the West Side. And leaders began rising up on the West Side who were speaking for the citizens in what they felt were underserved and underrepresented areas of the city. And which, so far as I'm concerned, was necessary, absolutely necessary. I got involved in several different activities. One that I particularly have loved and found rewarding was the San Antonio Parks Foundation. I've always loved parks. Public parks are wonderful for the people. Not everyone can grow up in a neighborhood where there are nice lawns and nice areas to go, but public parks fill a need for people to get out and get to touch back with nature. At a time when one of San Antonio's greatest health needs was to get rid of all the pit privies in the city. And people can't even remember that day now. But it was to get the sewer systems expanded and throughout the entire city. But there were unincorporated areas in our area that needed to be taken in to be serviced. Incorporated areas that had grown up with just the pit privies. And it has been a long time process of the expansion. And I think we are, a very important, we've grown to be a more and more important city. We have a strategic location with Mexico and international trade. I just was really thrilled to have the Queen in San Antonio. One of the pictures I have of the Queen is the Queen and I are sitting at the front of one of our river cruisers and cruising down the river. And that's always kind of the thing that we do with visitors. We do it with the Prince of Wales, we do it with whoever comes. And we had the King and Queen of Spain. We've had so many wonderful visitors in different times, and we always show off our river. And so I think you never completely know all the opportunities that you may have in a lifetime as you develop and as your career develops. But you have to be willing to say that's a possibility and move out on the possibilities.